1 minute ago, Lil Wayne reveals secret tape tied to global trafficking. Courtroom stunned. It started with a whisper. 12 days into a trial the world had dismissed as just another celebrity scandal. Something shifted. The courtroom, usually filled with murmurs and clicking pens, fell into a suffocating silence as a black speaker was rolled to the center. The audio file wasn't on any official list. It hadn't been mentioned in pre-trial disclosures. Even the judge looked confused. And then the voice began. "You don't let them think they've got a choice." It was Diddy. The room froze. Then came another voice, deeper, recognizable, infamous. R. Kelly. The gallery gasped. The judge didn't interrupt. The audio was authenticated, submitted under seal, and reviewed by federal investigators. There was no turning back. Their conversation began casually, studio time tours, music. But slowly it spiraled into darkness. They talked about control, discipline, power. It wasn't just chilling, it was strategic. You give too much freedom, you lose the edge. They don't talk when their rent's paid. The judge raised his hand. A juror covered her mouth. In the gallery, a woman wept. No one looked away. They named people, some censored, some not. Female artists, staff, assistants. Diddy joked about removing someone before they could speak out. R. Kelly mentioned blackmail folders, just in case. The tape lasted 11 minutes and 47 seconds. When it ended, the courtroom remained frozen. Not one person spoke. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Outside, the world was already reacting. Within minutes, the recording leaked. TikTok, Reddit, Twitter, all flooded with hashtags. News outlets struggled to keep up. Influencers streamed reactions. Survivors, some named, many not, began to speak up. Inside the courthouse, Diddy's legal team unraveled. They objected, claiming manipulation, hearsay. But the prosecutor reminded the court the audio passed federal authentication. Chain of custody was unbroken. And then a new name surfaced, Talia Morgan. She hadn't been on any list. She hadn't been seen in years. But when she stepped into the courtroom, heads turned. Former assistant to both Diddy and R. Kelly. The woman who once coordinated their private events. The one who disappeared. Talia took the stand with no hesitation. Her voice didn't crack. Her oath was firm. "I coordinated private meetings," she said. "Cleared rooms, hid phones. I was instructed to stay invisible." Then she paused. "But once I left my phone on by accident. It recorded everything." Gasps. She handed over audio memos, verified by time-stamped emails. The court allowed her full statement. Talia revealed the system control surveillance threats. Girls brought in under false contracts. Staff silenced through payouts or fear. "I tried to leave twice," she said. "First I was threatened. Second time I found a tracker on my car." A chill swept the courtroom. And then she looked at Cassie, seated across the room. "There were girls younger than me, braver than me. Some didn't make it out. I did. I'm here because someone has to be." When court recessed, the gallery remained seated. No one moved. Not out of fear, but because truth had just stepped into the light. And for the first time, the shadows weren't safe anymore. By the time court resumed the next morning, the entire building felt different. Lines stretched around the block. Journalists elbowed for space, their faces taut with anticipation. No one was whispering anymore. The silence of the previous day had shifted into the collective roar of a world realizing the cost of its ignorance. Inside the gallery filled before 9:00 a.m., new faces appeared. Former staff, distant relatives, even retired entertainers quietly slipped into seats. Everyone wanted to witness what came next. At precisely 9:05, the bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, visibly drained. His robe looked heavier, his eyes darker. He glanced at Diddy, then quickly away. The prosecution stood. "Your Honor, we would like to introduce our next witness, Miss Talia Morgan." The gallery murmured, though most had expected her return. This time Talia walked slower, her nerves evident but controlled. She took her seat, hands folded, gaze steady. "Miss Morgan, do you recognize this document?" the prosecutor asked, holding up a sheaf of papers. She nodded. "That's my journal. Dated entries from 2013 to 2017. I kept it hidden in 3 separate locations. Each entry covers events I witnessed or was ordered to coordinate." The judge motioned for the record, admitted. She began to read. November 3, 2013. I was told to escort a 19-year-old girl to a recovery suite after a private event. She looked dazed. When I asked questions, I was reassigned to a different floor. May 22, 2014. A female artist left in tears. She said she'd been promised a contract, but ended up being asked to sign an NDA instead. I overheard someone joke, "She'll be back when her rent's due." Talia's voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. August 19, 2015, R. Kelly visited. They met in the studio's red room. Staff were told to clear the floor. I heard laughter, but also crying. Each entry piled like bricks in a growing wall of evidence. The defense objected. These are unverified subjective recollections. Yet each one has a matching time-stamped email memo or internal security log, the prosecutor replied. The judge allowed the entries to stand. Then came the pivotal moment. Talia handed the court a USB drive. It contains location pings from my encrypted phone backups, with metadata showing exactly where I was when these events happened. The GPS logs match security check-ins. In a side room, FBI analysts verified the data. Court recessed again. Outside news outlets reported the bombshell evidence. Hashtags flooded the internet. "For Morgan Files," for "No More Silence." Cassie speaks. Inside, when court resumed, the gallery remained breathless. The next witness was unexpected. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we request permission to call Miss Ava Barron Combs." A gasp. Ava was a reclusive singer-songwriter who vanished from the industry 6 years ago. Rumors had circulated for years. She entered wearing a scarf, sunglasses, escorted by security. When she removed them, there was silence. Her face was pale but determined. "I was 17 when I met Diddy," she began. "He promised mentorship. Instead, I was invited to a retreat where I wasn't allowed to leave. I was given pills to help me adjust." The room froze. One night I found a list with names. Mine was highlighted in red. There were stars next to it. I don't know what it meant, but after that, things got worse. Her story mirrored many others. Controlled movement. Monitored calls. Contracts signed under duress. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sketchbook. I couldn't speak, so I drew. These are from that time. Page after page, rooms, expressions, handwritten fragments of lyrics, locked doors. The courtroom viewed them like sacred texts, silent, brutal, undeniable. The defense remained silent. And then came the final blow of the day. The prosecutor introduced a compilation file composed of snippets from security camera logs, digital timestamps, and access card metadata. It matched the testimony. It showed Ava's movements, confirmed Talia's locations. It was the system, a system so meticulously designed it took years to uncover. When court adjourned, people sat still, and Diddy. He sat lower, his shoulders no longer squared. He didn't look up, because now the voices he once silenced were speaking in concert. The third week of the trial began not with fanfare, but a palpable, eerie anticipation. The courtroom now felt like the center of a cultural reckoning. Security tripled. Federal agents were visible in the gallery. Something monumental was unfolding, and everyone knew it. At 9:02 a.m., Judge Harmon entered and immediately called for order. "We will begin with the reading of a newly submitted affidavit, verified and sealed until this morning," he stated. The prosecutor stood and began. "The court will now hear the statement of a former employee, identified only as Jordan M., whose identity has been verified by federal authorities and whose testimony has been deemed critical." The letter began, "I worked as a digital technician from 2015 to 2018. My job was to manage sound archives and encrypted server backups. Over time, I was directed to erase certain files, videos, recordings, notes from private events. Gasps echoed. One of Diddy's lawyers adjusted their tie, visibly uncomfortable. I was told not to question anything, just delete, but I didn't. I backed up everything to a private drive. I've since turned over that drive to federal authorities. The judge paused proceedings. This evidence will be reviewed under federal guidelines. Then came another twist, a surprise witness. Your Honor, we call to the stand Mr. Travis Keys. Whispers rippled. Travis had been Diddy's personal videographer for over a decade. He was largely silent after leaving the industry in 2020. Now he took the stand nervous but determined. I filmed hundreds of hours of footage, some for public releases, others private archives. He glanced at Diddy, then looked away. I was once asked to film a mentorship retreat. What I witnessed made me quit. He detailed scenes of guests disoriented, of meetings behind locked doors, of moments he was told never to speak of. But most damning, every camera we used had dual memory cards, one for editing. One went straight to a hidden server. I didn't know at first, but once I found out, I made copies. Court recessed to verify his materials. During lunch break, major news outlets interrupted programming. Hashtags flooded Twitter. Stalker hidden server. Travis speaks. Jocker blackmail vault. When court resumed, the prosecution confirmed, we've authenticated sample files. Names, dates, even contract discussions match witness testimony. And then another ripple. We intend to introduce the statement of Mr. Gene Deal. Deal, Diddy's former bodyguard, had gone public before. But this time, his words carried weight inside the courtroom. There were rooms no one but VIPs could enter. I wasn't allowed to question who went in or came out. One night, I found a guest unconscious. I was told to carry her to the wellness suite. I refused. Next morning, I was demoted. His testimony painted a picture of fear and hierarchy, protection for the powerful, punishment for those who asked questions. He ended with this, what I saw over those years still wakes me up at night. But it's not the memories, it's the silence. I stayed silent too long, no more. The court sat in silence. Cassie looked ahead, eyes fixed. Diddy stared into the table, and then came the final blow of the day. We request admission of Exhibit 47, the prosecutor said. It was a compiled timeline, cross-referenced data points from access logs, witness accounts, and audio metadata. It mapped a network, a pattern of events, and a system built not on coincidence but control. Diddy's team objected. Circumstantial, incomplete. The judge overruled. The pattern is consistent with testimony. The court will allow it. The screen showed a diagram of how victims were selected, groomed, isolated. One juror looked visibly shaken. Another removed her glasses and wiped her eyes. The prosecution concluded, what we have seen today is not scattered misconduct. It's systemic, intentional, rehearsed. Diddy didn't flinch. But his world, once fortified by silence, now trembled, with every voice rising against it. By the fourth week, the courtroom had become a shrine of reckoning. It wasn't just the echoes of testimony, or the tension between opposing counsels, it was the collective awareness that what was unfolding here would ripple far beyond these walls. The morning began with the defense trying to suppress newly surfaced digital correspondence. The judge denied the motion. The court has ruled these emails admissible. They form part of a digital trail previously hidden from public record. The prosecution began with a PowerPoint slide. Coercion by incentive. The email thread detailed how assistants were instructed to recruit specific personalities, aspiring artists, models, and influencers. Keywords appeared repeatedly: compliance, bonus, discretion clause, confidentiality, escalation. The court leaned in. One email read, ensure the guest understands the importance of discretion. Offer incentives before threat. Fear works best when preceded by comfort. A murmur spread through the room. The prosecution followed with a bank ledger. Unusual payments, cryptic memos. Special services transport, secure wellness maintenance. The witness was then called. Naomi Lang, logistics coordinator. She confirmed the payments. I was instructed to arrange transport for guests. Sometimes they weren't guests. They were contractors who didn't know they were signing something permanent. Her voice cracked. One woman called me crying 2 weeks later. She said she couldn't leave the estate. Her phone had been swapped. Her ID was missing. I didn't know what to say. I quit the next day. Then came the testimonies from tech specialists. 2 former IT consultants walked the court through the digital network, servers disguised as music file archives, footage tagged as rehearsals mislabeled to avoid detection. The infrastructure was designed for plausible deniability, said one. They played another verified clip, this one from 2016. It showed a gathering at a private estate. Music played softly. People laughed. But then the camera panned and a locked room with dim red lighting appeared. The clip cut to static, but its implications were enough. The defense objected, manipulative, inflammatory. The judge responded calmly. It will remain in evidence. The metadata supports authenticity. As court resumed after recess, the prosecution introduced a name not heard in court before Leona Maddox. An independent journalist, Leona had embedded herself in elite circles under a pseudonym for nearly 3 years. Her expose, once rejected by mainstream outlets, now found its way into evidence. Her journal, a red-bound notebook, was scanned and displayed. Page after page, detailed encounters, coded language, behavioral conditioning. She had recorded a conversation where a handler discussed performance evaluations tied to social compliance. The recording played. You test how far they'll go. The ones who flinch you isolate. The ones who obey you promote. Another blow to the defense. Silence deepened in the room. Then the prosecution announced, "We have new forensic analysis." A trove of documents had been uncovered from a burned backup server. Diddy's team argued this was digital entrapment, but federal agents confirmed partial file recovery showed encrypted notes communications between Diddy and unnamed associates. Maintain pipeline. Rotate quarterly. All must sign. Next came public reaction. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Survivors carried signs that read, "No more silence, and we believe you." Inside, the judge grew visibly fatigued. The proceedings now blurred the line between civil litigation and federal criminal scope. The court reconvened to hear from Lydia Chen, a behavioral psychologist consulted during federal review. She interpreted the consistent testimonies as patterns of psychological entrapment. This isn't a case of individual harm. It's a structure designed to dismantle personal agency and substitute obedience. Diddy avoided eye contact throughout. He scribbled on a notepad, then stopped. One of his lawyers whispered, but he waved them off. Lydia concluded, the trauma responses are consistent. Disassociation, silence, obedience. The system worked because it weaponized fear. The final act of the day came from the U.S. Marshals Service. They delivered a sealed envelope. The judge read it silently, then addressed the courtroom. This court acknowledges receipt of a federal indictment. Mr. Combs will remain under supervision until further proceedings. The gallery gasped. Cassie looked down, hand clenching the edge of her seat. Travis Keyes nodded slightly in her direction. The room remained frozen. The judge stood. Court is adjourned for the day. We will resume with final witness presentations tomorrow. And with that, the courtroom emptied, but no one felt like the day had ended, because something far larger had just begun. The next morning arrived not with anticipation, but with an aching sense of gravity. Every person entering the courtroom knew they were not walking into an ordinary legal proceeding, but a moment that history would eventually recount as pivotal. The prosecution wasted no time. They called to the stand Jerome Pike, a former audio technician employed at multiple high-end recording sessions hosted by Diddy. Pike was quiet, unassuming until he began speaking. I was in charge of room soundproofing and session backups, but some rooms were rigged for something else entirely. Surveillance, audio, sometimes video. They were labeled as security protocols, but nothing ever made sense. The prosecutor displayed Pike's employment records and flagged internal notes that supported his claims. Pike had documented timestamp storage logs and equipment orders linked directly to private estate gatherings. In one instance, Pike continued, I found a mislabeled file. Instead of music rehearsal audio, it was a private conversation, intimate and clearly non-consensual in context. I reported it to my supervisor. The next day, I was reassigned and signed a new NDA under threat of being blacklisted. Murmurs spread. The defense objected, but Judge Harmon, face taut with fatigue and resolve, overruled it. Let the witness speak. Then came the surprise. An anonymous testimony submitted by encrypted channel was cleared for reading. It came from a former event planner who coordinated logistics for influencer retreats. The voiceover narration of their letter played, while court visuals showed floor plans, invitation lists, and security logs. They always started with luxury, champagne, stylists, music. But by evening the mood shifted. Attendees were asked to surrender phones. Once you complied, you were isolated from the outside world. The letter described access wristbands color-coded by guest tier. Red bands meant VIP entertainers. Green bands, prospective inductees. One section sent a chill across the courtroom. They asked me to remove someone once. She had gotten hysterical. I told her I would help her leave. I was fired the next day. She was never seen again. The prosecution then called Dr. Elaine Rosenthal, a trauma-informed clinical psychologist who reviewed anonymous witness statements. She identified a systemic methodology. These individuals were not simply exploited, they were conditioned. The cycle of opulence and isolation created psychological dependence. Fear was the currency. A pattern emerged: entrapment through privilege disorientation, through isolation and control, via fear and financial dependence. Dr. Rosenthal displayed behavioral patterns seen in cult dynamics. Survivors often described moments of clarity where they realized they were no longer free to leave, not physically, emotionally, or socially. Cassie sat still, her gaze forward, her expression unreadable. Each word from Rosenthal added weight to her presence, validating the silent strength she had carried through weeks of trial. The defense scrambled. They called a former publicist who tried to deflect. It was entertainment culture excess, not entrapment. But under cross-examination, the publicist admitted they were paid to sign discretionary conflict waivers for attending private events. Their signature was among dozens. More damning were the metadata files entered next into evidence. The files, once believed to be irretrievable, were restored by a federal forensics unit. Timestamps, GPS data, and guest registries aligned with testimonies. The picture forming was no longer one of rumors or conjecture, but a blueprint of systemic exploitation. Then came the courtroom's darkest moment yet. A witness was granted permission to testify behind a screen for safety. Voice altered, name withheld, but their presence shook the gallery. I was 17 when I was told I had a future in music. What I walked into was not mentorship, it was captivity. They described being moved from one estate to another, contracts signed without parental oversight, promised safety but given silence. I was told my story would ruin careers, that I would never work again. The prosecution displayed signed non-disclosure agreements. Each document carried names and initials, including D.C. Sean Combs. Back in the gallery, a gasp escaped. The narrative had moved from implication to direct attribution. Then came the moment that shook the trial to its core. Federal prosecutors entered with emotion. Due to the corroborative evidence presented during these proceedings, the Department of Justice has opened a formal criminal investigation into Mr. Combs and associated entities. Judge Harmon looked directly at Diddy. This trial may transform in scope. I advised the defense to prepare for a change in jurisdiction. Diddy said nothing, but his face, once the portrait of control, was now a mask of unease. He leaned forward, hands interlocked, not defiant but drained. Outside the courtroom, media frenzy exploded. Breaking news tickers. Headlines blared, Diddy trial now. Criminal probe, witness alleges, musical icons double life. Back inside, the final witness of the day stepped forward. Travis Keys, former security detail, once part of Diddy's inner circle. He didn't bring files, he brought memory. I was assigned to escort VIPs to and from restricted zones. One time I questioned it, said something felt wrong. I was told I wasn't paid to feel, just to follow protocol. Keys described an estate wing with 24/7 surveillance, where even internal staff needed biometric access. They said it was for asset protection. I realized later it wasn't objects being guarded, it was secrets. The courtroom sat frozen. Then Keys ended with a line that echoed long after court adjourned. I've carried guilt every day, but the only way to undo silence is to speak. So that's what I'm doing. Judge Harmon stood. Court adjourned until tomorrow. But no one moved. The gavel fell, but everyone understood the real reckoning had just begun. The weight of the courtroom had grown unbearable. Silence gripped every corner, broken only by the echoing steps of the bailiff escorting the next witness. The world outside was spiraling with speculation hashtags and headlines, but inside every breath was measured, every word weaponized. As the final witnesses took the stand, the trial of Diddy had transformed from a celebrity spectacle into a seismic cultural event. Cassie's case was no longer hers alone. It now stood for every unnamed voice that had suffered in silence. Lil Wayne, once just an unexpected figure in the shadows, now sat at the front, his presence no longer symbolic, but pivotal. He had initiated a cascade of revelations, and now he stood ready to close the loop. Judge Harmon entered briskly. His gavel struck not to silence chaos, but to frame a solemn command. We reconvene to complete what must be heard. The court will allow concluding testimony from the federal liaison and grant closing remarks to both parties. The liaison stepped forward, Agent Marla Haynes, known for her brutal honesty and unshakable demeanor. She had overseen the collection of surveillance footage, emails, audio backups, and corroborating documentation. Her voice sliced through the room. We have verified that the audio presented earlier originated from Diddy's private server, recovered during a joint investigation into financial fraud and trafficking concerns. This case intersects with operations monitored by the Department of Homeland Security and Interpol. It is now a multi-jurisdictional criminal inquiry. Gasps. Even seasoned journalists looked rattled. The courtroom, once fixated on a single plaintiff, now realized it had been sitting in the heart of a global web. Agent Haynes continued presenting a timeline of communications between Diddy and several international contacts. Each name redacted for legal protection came with location logs, financial transfers, and recorded exchanges. These documents suggest a long-standing operation of manipulation, blackmail, and human trafficking, hidden under the guise of artist development and celebrity patronage. Lil Wayne requested the right to speak next. The court allowed it. He stood slowly. Gone was the swagger of stage presence. In its place, a steady gaze. I watched too many people get ruined. I saw the tapes. I talked to people who couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe. I stayed silent for a while, maybe too long. But this had to stop. I didn't want to be another guy who knew something and did nothing. He described the moment he first got involved, a cryptic message from a former assistant. A flash drive slipped into his jacket backstage, a plea. From that moment, Wayne became more than a bystander. He connected with victims, funded legal consultations, and eventually became the bridge between whistleblowers and federal agents. Cassie watched with trembling eyes. His truth validated hers. The gallery was still. No one doubted him now. Then came the twist. A second recording, submitted anonymously, cleared for playback. The voice was unmistakably Diddy's again. This time speaking to an unidentified man. They think this is about girls. Nah. This is about control, about owning the next decade of culture. If you don't break them early, they become threats. His laugh, cold, hollow. I keep a leash on every one of them. They know I got the tapes, the contracts. Even their mamas owe me. The man on the tape asked what would happen if one of them talked. Then we burn 'em. Same way we burned that producer in Euro 9. The courtroom collectively shuddered. That year, a prominent executive had disappeared from the scene without explanation. Now the shadow behind that absence had a name. Judge Harmon signaled for an emergency recess. The defense was spiraling. Diddy looked gaunt. His power was evaporating by the second. His attorneys requested to open settlement discussions. The prosecution declined. This is no longer civil, the lead prosecutor said. This is criminal, and the people demand justice. As the courtroom reconvened, Cassie took the stand one final time. Not to restate her trauma, but to name it. To frame it with strength. I used to wonder what made someone like him untouchable. It wasn't the money, it was our silence. Every time we told ourselves it wasn't our place, we built his castle a little taller. But today, I'm tearing a brick out of that wall, and tomorrow someone else will. And the day after that, he'll have nothing left but dust. The gallery erupted in a standing silence, the kind where bodies move but mouths stay shut because words aren't big enough. The jury would deliberate. But the verdict was already echoing through every major network forum and living room. Outside, a group of women, faces half-covered, hands clasped, held candles. Survivors, supporters. Some had stories, others had scars, but all had one thing in common. They weren't afraid anymore. As the gavel struck to adjourn, it didn't signal the end. It signaled a shift. A reckoning had begun, and nothing, not PR spins, not decades of fame, not old contracts could stop what was coming next.